Hey folks, I'm Leaf. I'm a senior engineering manager here at Semgrep. I've been in the information security space for about a decade. I've done work as a security consultant, as an internal application security person, but the last 5 years or so, I've been focused more on helping build security features. And as of joining Semgrep a few months ago, I'm helping build out the Semgrep cloud platform. We are joined here today by Jacob. I'll pass it over to him.
Hey, how's it going? Yeah, I'm Jacob. I'm the head of security here at Merge. My background, I started working in the security field as doing pen testing, kind of moved over into the application security space from there. Was most recently at One Medical, and then now at Merge, kind of transitioned to beyond product security to kind of working on all the different security programs we have here at Merge.
Cool. And yeah, Chris gave us a little bit of an overview of Merge, so we'll skip over that. But what are some of your goals at Merge for your security team, and how do you want the team to grow over the next couple of years?
Yeah, I think as far as our security program at Merge, as a startup that's growing rapidly, trying to scale the security program with the business. We've got all these programs in place today that we're running. We SOC 2 and ISO compliance and kind of our security operations and product security program, but trying to as the business is growing, keeping in mind some of like the statistics around like breaches being correlated with sizes of organization and just the added complexities and attack surface when you're working with a company that's growing rapidly. How do you keep the security program on top of everything that's going on in the organization? So as I think that's top of mind as we're kind of growing and over time, thinking about what are our goals for our security program? How do we scale out the processes that we have today? How do we make that efficient when we're at 150, when we're at 500?
Yeah, that makes sense. A lot of the stuff starts out like kind of manual or semi-manual, and that probably works when you have a small number of developers, but as you get more and more developers, it makes sense to figure out how to do things more efficiently. When you're thinking about like growing the team, do you think of it as like a ratio of engineers to security people, like company size to engineering, or company size to security people? Like what's kind of your metric for that?
Yeah, I think ratio is definitely plays into it. I don't think it's the end all be all of what you should be looking at for headcount for your security program. I think when you're looking at just like purely product security, that can be one good metrics, but lines of code, the complexity of your application, what are some programs that you want to be introducing? So if you are running, if you want to do a lot of internal pen testing, for example, you may need to think about having headcount that supports that. And then thinking kind of across the board, like just looking at engineers to security folks, doesn't take into account like your security operations or some of your other security programs. And so kind of thinking holistically, what are the things that are your top risks? And do you have the staff to enable to actually effectively address those risks? So that can change rapidly as the company is growing. Maybe that manual process works when you've got just 100 people at your company, but then suddenly you can't run your vendor security program and adequately dig in the way that you want to in each vendor in order to assess that risk. And so that's when you can start thinking about that, okay, we might need to bring in more headcount and sort of scale the team. And the ratio is definitely part of that.
Yeah, I think that is a great jumping off point or like a follow-up question. When you're thinking about risks to the business, a lot of times you have to explain these to people that are not security professionals. They're probably very smart people in their own field, but maybe they're somebody who's never worked with a security team before. Do you have any Jacob pro tips for conveying the importance of the worst things that you think could happen to the company to folks that don't live in the security world?
Yeah, I mean that's definitely a challenge. Working in security, I think you can get kind of siloed and start to like look at just security risks without kind of considering the business context. I think the biggest tip I would give for that is understand the business context. Be in the room with the business people, have conversations. What is important to your company? And when you have that understanding, it's a lot easier to go and say, hey, this is a risk that I feel like actually material impacts the business, and this is why, and here's how it ties back to our goals or what we do today. And when you come from a place like that, it's a lot easier to get common ground. And so even if they disagree, like of the severity or the impact, whatever it is, if they disagree with that, you need to put resources to that risk. It's a lot easier to have that conversation because now you've got this common ground and you can speak the same language that they're speaking. And so when there's a disagreement, it's a lot easier to start winning folks over. And so I think, yeah, it's really important to have that, understand where they're coming from and why they wouldn't want to assign resources to address that risk before you just want to go in and say, I'm focused on this one risk that I see, and this is critical to our business. Without that business context, that's meaningless.
Yeah, I think another thing that also makes it a lot easier is, thankfully for you, you sell to other businesses,
Mhm.
and those other businesses generally get upset if their vendors have security issues that impact them. And so I think that, it's kind of a secret power to just, be able to say like, hey, I'm advocating for our customers. This is something that impacts sales. This is something that's going to make sales conversations harder if we do a bad job, and make sales conversations easier if we can show people we're doing a good job. So yeah, I think that's also something that helps out.
Absolutely.
So let's go back in time a little bit. How did you first hear about Semgrep, and how did Semgrep end up at Merge?
Yeah, so I used Semgrep previous roles. So I was at One Medical. We used Semgrep there. I loved it. Loved the experience there. When I arrived at Merge, was kind of was thinking about kind of bringing static analysis, security static analysis over, and was kind of looking at what was in place when I got here. What are some of the things? And found that our development team was actually already using Semgrep. The open source version was scanning. They had some linting rules. None of the security rules were enabled when I arrived, but there were some linting specific ones that were for code quality that were already running in the CI and flagging if there was anything that came up. And so I think that was one of those things. It's really easy to as a security person looking to introduce a tool to a development organization when they already understand, they use the tool, they love the tool. Being able to just say, okay, let me just flip the switch and get some security rules in here as well. That'll flag in the same way that you've kind of been expecting it to. That's really powerful. And so having that development buy-in just made it a really easy decision to go with Semgrep.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's funny that there were just engineers that were using it, but not for security, even though it's primarily known as a security tool. I guess that kind of speaks to the power of the engine, and it's nice when developers actually want to use security tools that you're providing to them.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the most important. Like looking at a security tool, if developers hate it, it's not going to get used effectively. It's kind of useless, and so that's it. Really, definitely speaks to the power of the tool.
Yeah, that reminds me kind of more broadly of, it's like one of my favorite security tweets of all time. It's by Dino, who's the head of security at Cash App. And he said, if your engineering team doesn't like your security team, you're never going to have a good security program. And I just think that's so true, because the engineering team will just figure out a way to not do whatever you're asking them if they don't have a good relationship with the security team.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, love that.
What are some examples of some things that you've used Semgrep for that you thought were really high value?
Yeah, I think the most recent kind of example that we had, we happened to kind of roll out Semgrep alongside a pen test that we did. When we got those, so we had Semgrep, we triaged all the findings, we were able to remediate a ton of things. When we got that pen test report back, I think around half the issues that were discovered, Semgrep had already flagged. So we were able to, before we even got the report, we had already remediated those issues, which is great. It kind of goes to the value of what Semgrep can kind of bring to a code base. And then for the other half that we didn't have, we were able to write Semgrep rules that would cover and look for different variants of that vulnerability, and now have that assurance that going forward, we're not going to introduce that same type of vulnerability back into the code base. So there's things that are specific to our code base that we want to be writing rules for and kind of introduce that. We can make it kind of a linchpin of our or kind of that final step in our vulnerability management program when we're working like as an application security on our application security program. It isn't anymore just like find the vulnerability, write up the ticket and have that remediated. We've got this kind of additional step now of first write a Semgrep rule, look for variants of that vulnerability across our code base and eliminate those. And then also that rule becomes blocking on new PRs so that we have that extra assurance that we're not going to roll up a vulnerability that we've already seen before into production.
Yeah, people hate fixing stuff that that has been flagged like multiple times. It's much better just to have the developer get an alert when they first push it and just never even get it into the code base versus having to go back and like fix it later.
I think that's definitely it. When you're rolling out like a static analysis tool, you're going to end up with a backlog of a ton of findings. And then there's and you kind of just have to work through those and slog through to get those fixed. And those are the annoying ones. But the real value is like once that happens again and it's rolled out and you can fix it in line once you've made that PR, like that's super powerful and definitely a lot more applicable to what someone is. It's like, oh, I wrote this. I can just go and fix it right now real quick.
Yeah, definitely. I think making it as similar as possible to the other tests that engineers are used to passing and failing is the way to go. I mean, engineers are used to fixing things that the tests identify as broken. Security should just be the same.
Exactly. Yeah.
You mentioned a couple of unique rules that you've written for your organization. Is there anything that you're comfortable sharing with the recorded audience?
Yeah, I think one that we rolled out that I think was pretty valuable because it's specific to kind of our code base. We Django application. We have certain views that will launch async tasks. So there's a lot of processing power on the back end just from hitting an API endpoint. And we've implemented, we have a decorator that you can put on that view, that on any view that will add rate limiting specific to that view. And so one of the Semgrep rules that we've deployed is if you have a view that that launches an async task, so there's a lot of processing power, you have to add that decorator. And so that it was really easy to kind of say, once we identified that as a potential issue or something that could cost us money or resources and of like wasting time if someone were to like hit that with a ton of requests. It took less than 5 minutes to kind of get a Semgrep rule in place, find like 4 instances that we didn't have the decorator that we wanted to go back and add it. And then now we've had it actually flag a few times where someone either added the ability to launch an async task as part of an existing view and then didn't also add the decorator. Or they added a new view that didn't have the decorator that did some async processing. So I think having that aspect, it's not just like, oh, let's just document somewhere, and then hopefully the engineer has read that document and is thinking about it when they go and write that view. That is now like common knowledge and will add comments to the PR, similar to any other test, automated test that the engineers are running.
Yeah, we have something similar. It's not quite the same, but we're a Flask application, and we have something that flags if you don't have an authorization check in the handler. So it'll say like, hey, you probably need one of these. And of course, there's instances where you don't actually need that, but the vast majority of the time you do need some sort of authorization check.
Yeah, and it's worth that double check. Just having that little comment come up and say like, "Hey, did you mean you should have this authorized, right?" Even if it's false positive, even if it's not, yeah, it's useful for sure.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you're like calling some other code that like has the auth check built into it, and so you don't need to do it twice, or maybe it's like a pre-auth route, something like that. So yeah, definitely exceptions, but agree. Generally speaking, at least make them think, "Do I need this?"
Exactly.
Cool. So you've been using Semgrep for a while, originally as the open source tool and now as the paid offering. What's been one of the aha moments that you've had or that somebody at the company has had with Semgrep?
Yeah, I really feel like anytime we get Slack alerts for any time that a SemGrep rule triggers. And anytime I can kind of, by the time like I see those, sometimes I'm working on something else by the time I click on it. And when I can click on that and I see that it's already been fixed and the comments already been addressed by the time I'm looking at the PR that triggered on it, that's super impressive. Like that the developer sees that in line as they're working, is able to just kind of address it and eliminate real vulnerabilities. That's super powerful. And so I think that's a big one. The other half of kind of working with a stack analysis tool, we talked about kind of that triage process. Once you roll out a ton of security rules, you're going to get a giant backlog of hundreds of findings. If you're working on millions of lines of code, that can be thousands of findings across different repositories, across a ton of different areas of the code. And one of the things that I think the Semgrep platform does really well is that kind of bulk triage feature. If you see things that are like, okay, no, this is tests, this is test data, this isn't something I want to flag, being able to just kind of rapidly go through and mark those and then kind of get the ones are out using the beta ticketing feature, also just kind of knock those out as tickets if they're real findings to developers, has been super powerful to kind of get that giant backlog done in addition to kind of those PR kind of blocks.
Yeah. So yeah, you've talked about some of the things that have been great about using Semgrep. What were some of the challenges that you had either in the implementation or in the like longer term management, and how can the listeners avoid the same problems that you've run into? And these could be technical with Semgrep. It could also be cultural with like, bringing it to the organization. Really, I'd say anything's fair game here.
Yeah. No, I think culturally it was fairly smooth, especially with folks already familiar with the tool. I think one of the bigger challenges we had, it was really easy to get like our top 5 most used repositories to get Semgrep out. We use GitHub Actions for all our CI/CD. There's just provided kind of Semgrep workflow that you can just add in. Maybe some minor tweaks. We just had to make sure that all the requirement for Semgrep Supply Chain, all the requirements were in the right place. It expects like just for a Python application, like a one requirements.txt file. And so we just added a little bit of commands or added an initial kind of command that just takes everything and puts it into that one file so that Semgrep can scan all those dependencies. That was super quick to kind of get those out. But when we also we have a ton of different repositories that have like different Terraform modules in them, for example, or there's kind of a random one-off projects or hackathon things. And some of them, a lot of those aren't deployed, but some of them we do want to make sure we have some static analysis on those. And so because we have branch protection rules on, we weren't able to kind of click the button and get the Semgrep app to auto. And then also, I kind of mentioned, there is a little bit of tweaking you have if your dependency files are in weird places inside of directories. Semgrep can't always find those right away. And so trying to find that like one standard workflow that worked for the majority of cases, and then with minor tweaks, roll those all out. I think the way that I would say you can kind of work against this or kind of plan for it is identify, if you don't already have a list of your GitHub repositories that is ranked by security risk, I would highly recommend you kind of do that exercise, because you can find some things that like, oh, actually, we want to make sure all of our Terraform, anything that has Terraform in it, that's a higher risk than some of these other ones. And so it makes it really easy to prioritize a rollout of a tool like this. And then having development team on standby. You need someone to, if you're as a security engineer are making all the PRs to push the workflows, just having someone on standby that can mark and approve those, or if you're having a developer kind of do that on your behalf, that owns the repository, just making sure that they have someone to approve it if you have branch protection for all these other repos. So that's just something you can do to prepare and be ready for that.
Yeah, that makes sense. The severity of the repos is also really helpful for other purposes too.
Yeah,
I mean, it's
definitely.
helpful for prioritizing the findings, whether those findings come from Semgrep or bug bounty or pen test or whatever. I think that's just inherently a factor of how quickly you're going to care about fixing something is is the finding somewhere we even care about.
Yeah, it'll come up like if you're triaging dependencies, if you get a CVE, when it's like, okay, we can fix this in our top 4 most risky repositories, or most used production, whatever that is. And then kind of, okay, we didn't get to this one, but it's a lower risk because this isn't deployed in production. You've got that triage, you got everything that you can just kind of line up. Makes it easier.
You've mentioned our supply chain product a couple of times in passing. Do you have any thoughts you want to share about your experience with the supply chain product?
Yeah, definitely. I think it is the being able to tie, so like I think traditional kind of the SCA, like composition analysis, where you're looking at dependencies and assigning them CVEs, is great. And it shows you things that are potentially risky, but it's just a laundry list of requirements. Like we've got to upgrade all of these different packages across all these different repositories. It doesn't really tell you anything about like, how do I prioritize those from a risk perspective besides the CVSS score. What Semgrep Supply Chain can add into that mix is having that reachability analysis. So for vulnerability, I think recently as a great example, Django had a vulnerability related to how they were parsing or handling URLs. And so if you didn't use that particular like call using Django to parse that URL, you aren't vulnerable at all. And so there were a number of repositories that we had that weren't doing any handling of URLs like that. And so we can just say, we actually don't care at all about this CV. This isn't a ticket we have to put out to our development team. Even though it's a medium or a high CVSS score, this isn't something that affects us. And so being able to kind of knock that out and really get to the heart of prioritizing all of this laundry list of kind of CVEs or dependency upgrades that we need to have goes a long way. It kind of helps build developer trust so that you're not just telling them, oh, just fix it because the tool flagged it. And it goes a long way into actually meaningfully addressing risk, because now you've got like, oh, not only is this a CVE associated with a version of the dependency you have, but it is reachable in our code base. And here are the 2 or 3 lines of code where it is reachable, which is super powerful.
Yeah, it also just helps maintain your security engineering capital because you're asking them to do less work overall. Because like everything you ask engineering teams to do chips away a little bit at like something else that you could ask them to do. So yeah, it's nice. I also think that it just I think it's just a much more realistic flow for what developers are expecting to, like, they don't expect to have to fix something that like doesn't affect them. So yeah,
that's
nice.
right. Exactly. I think there are cases also where maybe you don't want to upgrade for whatever reason, and having that like, oh, these are the 3 places in your code base where like this vulnerability came up is really like, maybe you just want to use a different library for like handling URL parsing for the Django example. Being able to have that like kind of alternative, here's all of the information, give that to the developer of how you can fix it. It just, that having that extra option in your back pocket is pretty valuable too.
Yeah, agreed. As somebody that worked pretty closely with developers when I was on the AppSec team at Segment, it's not always a straightforward upgrade. Like sometimes it's like, okay, it's a minor version or like a point version update, and it's like, fine, that's probably whatever. But other times it's like, this thing depends on this other thing, which like is used in this specific way, and like the functionality is changing. It's not just a security upgrade. And it's would be really annoying to bother somebody to do this whole chain of changes just to support the tool saying like, hey, this thing is vulnerable, when in fact you're not even using it in a vulnerable way. So
yeah, I think that's one of the big like the tool, like, having like that auto PR thing. It's like, great, like some of the tests pass or breaks, having that extra like, oh no, I actually need to go and fix and like make changes to, because the library changed, and or how I'm working with this like doesn't always work. And so just having that ability to go a little bit deeper, here's where actually things were triggered, here's like, yeah, it can save you from going down that route of updating Django, which can be a giant headache for sure.
Yeah, definitely. So you've been using Semgrep for a while. I'm sure there's a lot of things that you love. What is something that you feel like it's missing? Like, what are you hoping that we build next?
Yeah. I think so. I've mentioned I've been playing around with the ticketing beta version to kind of knock out to our tickets to our developers. I would kind of love to see that like continue to enhance. We've like especially relating to like with multiple different boards supporting the ability to kind of push out tickets to different development teams based on what repository it is. It'd be really cool if that was even like like supported the code owners file or something that you could say like, oh no, this team owns this section of the code base, and just really quick triage between like, okay, here's a list of like this type of issue. Here's where it is. I know what the team that owns that is, and being able to just at a button click to kind of just throw that over would be pretty awesome.
Yeah, we have a lot of stuff that we wanted enhance about the ticketing integration in the second half of this year. We just wanted to get something out there early and get people at least getting some value instead of holding it back until we have like a grand deliverable, because you never know what customers are going to ask for, and the stuff that we thought might be a good follow-up might actually be lower priority. So we figured at least people can get the tickets into the board. That probably saves a lot of time, but yeah, it's definitely like a Semgrep project to ticketing board mapping is definitely on like the list of things that we've heard people ask about.
Yeah. For now, we have this kind of staging board that we kind of dump everything to. That's like a security board, and so we can kind of we kind of triage it from there. So it dumps out the ticket, all the context is there, and then kind of do that manual work. We're working with our like TPMs to go through and prioritize that for anything that comes up. But I think that having that ability to kind of do it just as in the platform as a security engineer would be great.
Yeah. What are some of the big goals that you're excited about over the next, like 6 months or so? Like could be Semgrep related or not.
Yeah. I think sort of on the Semgrep side, we talked a little bit about kind of building out kind of custom rules and implementing that as part of your application security program. I think that's something that's super valuable when we are thinking about how do we grow, like scale our product security program as we kind of build out that program, bring on engineers that are supporting that function. Having writing Semgrep rules that are to the high risk. So not only like did we find the vulnerability, but kind of once we have like a list of we've got high risk areas of the code base we want to do our own testing. As part of that testing, writing Semgrep rules to kind of figure out where the areas, things that are risks that are tightly associated to particular things in our code base. And so I think that's sort of the powerful thing about when you have an engine like Semgrep where it's really easy to write custom rules for. Kind of treating it like how a detection operations program might have. So if you've got like, hey, these are the high risk detections that we want to write. You prioritizing like different detections. You can do that with Semgrep rules because like we think it would be super useful to kind of go in and write Semgrep rules that would identify like we feel like IDOR is particularly important for our and we do authorization in these kind of weird ways. And these different ways, you can write really specific rules. And so I think having that, building out that giant backlog, which is something we're already kind of doing in our engineering retros when something comes up, but being able to proactively kind of do that and build out like a giant list of here's the to-do list for Semgrep rules that we want to be writing and implementing, and then kind of knocking those out in order of a risk prioritization, I think is something that definitely excites me as far as like a product security program.
Do you think you'll be doing most of the rule writing as like the security team, or do you think that you would be able to get to a point where some amount of engineers, not every engineer, like feels comfortable writing a Semgrep rule to catch a security issue?
Oh yeah, we already actually have engineers that are doing that. Gave a little mini Semgrep training, pointed people at the Semgrep demo. It's really quick to get through that kind of learning. The module that Semgrep has on their website. And so we have engineers that are writing rules. So if we have a vulnerability for the pen test ones, for example, as part of that, we had Semgrep rules that were written based on that. I am writing rules, but then also kind of having that scale out to the engineering when we find something. And also just generic linting rules. Like I mentioned, when that's what our engineering team was using it before I joined Merge. It's powerful, so you can kind of have them use it for things that you like, bad patterns and things like that can also be caught. So it's definitely useful to have that skill and train developers and make that part of your like when you assign a ticket to have a developer remediate a finding. If they're willing to write a Semgrep rule for that, that definitely really scales your security team, makes it everyone's responsibility.
Yeah, I think people are probably sick of hearing the phrase shift left, but like I think that really is what the original intent was, is like getting engineers to care about security in the same way that they care about reliability or like operational issues and all of the other things that engineers are tasked with caring about these days. But the benefit is like if you can own all those things, like you can move a lot faster because you just don't have to wait for other parts of the business to say like, yes, you can do this thing or not.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. So those are all the questions that I had. Don't see any Q&A from the audience. But unless there's anything else that you want to share, Jacob, we really appreciate you coming on and being a guest for us.
Definitely. Yeah, really appreciate you having me.
Cool. Well, best of luck with everything, and we'll catch you all next time.